All right, so are you ready for a deep dive? Let's talk arcane.
Oh, I'm ready.
Specifically, we're going to be talking about Viktor.
All right.
And the source material that we are using today is a podcast episode
Good.
called Viktor in Arcane, Savior or Tragic Messiah.
Very interesting title.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's going to be looking at Viktor in the context of those two sort of archetypes, I guess we could call them.
Oh, definitely.
And asking, is he more like Jesus or more like Prometheus?
Right.
And I think it's a really cool question to think about because Viktor...
He is so complex.
He is.
I think he really embodies that tension, that, inner conflict between wanting to elevate humanity, wanting to help people, but at the same time having this potential to cause harm.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him such a fascinating character.
Totally. I mean, he's brilliant. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
But he's so driven to overcome human limitations that it takes him down this path that could lead to, like, incredible breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Or utter disaster.
I mean, he's playing with fire, literally and figuratively.
Right. And the source material actually makes a comparison between Viktor and Jesus.
Oh.
Which I found really interesting.
I mean, it's a bold comparison.
It is. It's saying that he's kind of offering this form of salvation.
Okay.
But instead of through, faith or redemption or any of those more traditional ideas, it's through science and technology.
Right, right.
His gospel, so to speak, is progress.
Yeah.
And technology is his tool to achieve this vision of a perfect world.
Like a utopia, a world without suffering and weakness.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very tempting idea.
It is.
But, is it possible?
Right, and that's where that Prometheus comparison comes in.
Ah, yes.
Because Prometheus, in Greek mythology, brought fire, which represents knowledge to humans, but was severely punished for it.
Yeah.
And it's like Viktor's quest for knowledge and power, could similarly have these unforeseen and potentially devastating consequences.
Like, who knows what he might unleash in his pursuit of this perfection.
Right. And it's interesting because it's almost like a modern-day retelling of Adam and Eve.
Oh, interesting.
Because they, sought forbidden knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But in Viktor's case, the stakes are even higher.
Definitely.
He's not just, like, nibbling on an apple.
No.
He's trying to rewrite the code of what it means to be human.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not just trying to understand human nature.
Right.
He's trying to change it.
Yeah, like he wants to control evolution itself.
Right, and he's specifically talking about merging humans and machines.
Yeah.
Transcending what we see as flaws and limitations.
Like he's trying to engineer away all the things that make us human in the first place.
Right, it's essentially like this man-made heaven.
Ah, I see.
Where technology eliminates weakness and suffering.
Which, I mean, on the surface sounds amazing, right?
Huh. It does.
But when you start to peel back the layers, it gets a bit more complicated.
Yeah. And that's where things get really interesting.
Absolutely.
This whole concept of man-made heaven, it makes me think of transhumanism.
Oh, yeah.
Which is all about using technology to enhance human capabilities and potentially even achieve some form of, like, immortality.
Right, right.
It's a super fascinating idea, but also super controversial.
Yeah, it definitely raises some big questions.
It does.
Yeah.
And Viktor's story in Arcane really brings those debates to life.
It's a great example of how science fiction can explore these real-world issues.
Totally. And it gets you thinking, like, what does it even mean to be human if we eliminate all suffering and weakness through technology?
What's left?
Right. What's the point? Do we lose something essential in the process?
Yeah, like, would we even recognize ourselves anymore?
And it makes you wonder if, even with the best of intentions, Viktor's methods could end up dehumanizing.
Oh, yeah.
The very people he's trying to save.
That's the irony, right?
Right. I mean, he's willing to sacrifice everything. His body, his mind, his relationships, everything.
He's all in on this vision.
He is. And I think that's what makes his character so compelling.
I agree.
Because he's not a clear-cut hero or villain.
Right.
He's this complex mix of both.
He's got this, like, inner conflict between, his desire to do good and the potential for his actions to have really negative consequences.
Exactly. And the source material points out that he embodies this conflict between faith and reason.
Oh, interesting.
Progress and humility.
Yeah.
And it really forces us as viewers, or as listeners in the case of this podcast, to grapple with these, like, universal tensions.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to all of us.
Right. And it makes you ask, is his ambition justified? Even if it comes at such a great cost.
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And there's no easy answer.
Right. It's like he's walking this tightrope between savior and destroyer.
Yeah, I like that image.
And it's so hard to know which way he's going to fall.
It's like we're watching a train wreck in slow motion. We know it's going to be bad, but we can't look away.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole idea of a man-made heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, it really sticks with me.
It's a powerful concept.
It is. It seems like Viktor is almost challenging traditional notions of divinity and the natural order.
Right. Like, is there a higher power?
Yeah.
Or can we create our own version of paradise?
Exactly. Can we unpack that idea a bit more?
Definitely. I think it's a really crucial part of understanding Viktor's character.
Okay, great.
And his motivations.
Okay.
So one of the things that Viktor's vision really pushes us to consider is this idea of what's considered natural.
Okay.
Like, what are the boundaries of human potential? And do we have the right to transcend those boundaries using technology?
Right. It's almost like he's rejecting this idea of a higher power and saying, like, we can do this ourselves.
Right. We don't need a god to save us.
Right. We can be our own gods.
Which, some people might see as hubris.
Oh, got
but
that.
Others might see it as the next step in human evolution.
Right. It's that question, is he a visionary or a potential threat?
Exactly.
And it's a tough one to answer.
It is.
And the source material doesn't give us any easy answers.
Right.
It leaves it up to us to kind of decide how we interpret Viktor's actions.
And I think that's what makes it so thought-provoking.
Totally. Okay, so before we go any further down this rabbit hole, I think it's important to ground this discussion in some real-world examples.
I agree.
So what are some things that we see today that are like transhumanism in action?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, we're already seeing elements of transhumanism in fields like biotechnology, artificial intelligence, even prosthetics.
Right.
Think about gene editing, for instance.
Right.
Scientists are literally altering the building blocks of life.
Yeah, that's a really powerful example. And then you have AI, which is like becoming more and more sophisticated every day. And it's already so integrated into our lives.
Absolutely.
And some experts believe that AI could eventually surpass human intelligence.
Yeah.
And fundamentally change what it means to be conscious.
That's a mind-blowing concept.
It is. And then even something as seemingly simple as a prosthetic limb can be seen as a step toward transhumanism.
Right.
Because we're using technology to enhance and augment human capabilities.
Yeah, we're blurring the lines between natural and artificial.
Exactly. So, in a way, Viktor's vision of this world where humans merge with machines isn't as far-fetched as it might seem.
No, not already.
We're already taking those first steps.
We are.
And I think his story really forces us to confront the potential consequences of those choices.
It's a powerful reminder that science fiction often becomes science fact.
It does.
And Viktor's journey can really serve as a lens through which to examine the ethical and societal implications of these advancements.
Yeah, like what are we creating?
Right, and what does it mean for humanity in the long run?
Okay, so before we get too lost in the future, let's take a step back and really examine the ethical dilemmas that Viktor faces.
I think that's a really important part of the conversation.
Yeah. So, like, what are the potential downsides of his pursuit of a man-made heaven?
Right.
And are those risks worth taking?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And I think that's where the comparison to Lucifer becomes especially interesting.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So, Lucifer is often seen as a symbol of rebellion against divine authority. And Viktor, in a way, is doing the same thing.
How so?
By challenging the natural order. He's rejecting the idea that our limitations are set in stone and saying, like, we can use technology to overcome them. So the question is he stepping into dangerous territory by trying to reshape humanity?
According to his own vision, yeah.
Exactly.
And it definitely feels risky.
It does.
And it also makes me think about all the times in history where people have tried to play God.
Right.
And it's rarely ended well.
No, not usually.
So is Viktor, like, headed down that same path?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that even with noble intentions, our actions can have unforeseen and sometimes catastrophic outcomes.
It's like that old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Viktor's heart might be in the right place.
Yeah.
But his methods are potentially very dangerous.
I mean, he's playing with forces he might not fully understand.
Right. And I think that's the crux of the dilemma here.
Absolutely.
We have this character who is both brilliant and compassionate, but also driven by this ambition that could lead to his downfall.
Yeah.
And potentially the downfall of humanity itself.
It's a high-stakes game he's playing.
It is. It's like we're watching this train hurtling toward a destination we can't quite see.
Ooh, I like that.
We know it's going to be impactful, but whether it's a triumph or a tragedy remains to be seen.
And that's what keeps us on the edge of our seats, right?
Totally. We're invested in Viktor's journey.
Yeah.
But we're also apprehensive about where it might lead.
Definitely. It's like that feeling you get when you're reading a really good book or watching a gripping movie.
Yeah.
And you know something big is about to happen.
Yeah.
But you're not sure if it's going to be good or bad.
Exactly.
It's that tension that keeps you hooked.
Okay, so we've laid out the groundwork here, but I think it's time to dig a little deeper.
I agree.
Into the source material.
Okay.
And see what specific arguments are made about Viktor's motivations.
Right.
And the philosophical underpinnings of his actions.
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's do it.
Let's dive in. So one of the things the podcast digs into is how Viktor's vision of a man-made heaven really challenges these traditional ideas about divinity and the natural order.
Right.
Like, he's saying humans have the power to create their own paradise.
Right, right. It is a pretty radical concept.
Oh, it is.
Like, is that where the Lucifer comparison comes in?
I think so.
Okay.
Because Lucifer, is often seen as this rebel who challenged divine authority. And Viktor, in a way, is doing the same thing.
Yeah, he's saying we don't have to accept these limitations.
Yeah,
like they're set in stone.
He's rejecting that idea.
Yeah, like we can use technology to overcome them.
Exactly. And create a world where, like, suffering and weakness no longer exist.
It's powerful, but it also feels kind of dangerous.
It does.
Like, who are we to decide what the ideal human should be?
Right. It's a slippery slope.
It is. And what about, like, all the unintended consequences?
Oh, yeah. There's always that risk.
Right. It's like opening Pandora's box.
Exactly.
We might unleash something that we can't control.
And that's the heart of the debate, right?
It is.
Progress can be a double-edged sword. I mean, think about the atomic bomb. Like, it was a scientific marvel, but it also brought the potential for unimaginable destruction.
Right.
And I think Viktor's quest for this man-made heaven could similarly lead to these unintended and potentially devastating consequences.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, even with noble intentions, our actions can have unforeseen and sometimes catastrophic outcomes.
It's true.
It's like, what is it? The path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly. And I think that's why Viktor's story is so important. It serves as this cautionary tale about the dangers of, like, unchecked ambition.
Right.
And it reminds us that progress without careful consideration of the ethical implications can be just as destructive as any malicious intent.
Oh, absolutely.
That
makes me think about, like, all those classic stories about characters who make deals with the devil or who try to play God and end up suffering these terrible consequences.
Yeah, like they get in over their head.
Yeah. It's a theme that, like, resonates across cultures and time periods.
It does.
And it definitely feels relevant to Viktor's journey.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
It speaks to this idea that we need to approach progress with humility, recognizing that we don't always have all the answers.
Right.
And that our actions can have these ripple effects that we might not anticipate.
That's true. So it's not just about the destination. Right. It's about the journey.
Exactly.
And, like, being mindful of the choices we make along the way and considering the potential costs, not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really powerful message.
It is.
For all of us, regardless of whether we're working in science and technology or any other field, it's about recognizing that our actions have consequences.
Right.
And that we need to be accountable for those consequences.
Okay, so if we, like, apply that to Viktor's story, how do we weigh his ambition against the potential harm that his actions might cause?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It's like a really tough balance to strike.
It is. And I think that's where the moral ambiguity of his character really comes into play.
Right, because we see his brilliance.
We do.
We see his compassion, his desire to alleviate suffering.
He wants to help people.
Yeah.
He really does.
But we also see his willingness to, like, push boundaries.
Yeah.
To take risks. And to potentially sacrifice others in pursuit of his goals.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so complicated.
It's like he represents both the best and the worst of humanity.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All wrapped up in this one complex character.
He's a walking contradiction.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him so fascinating, right?
This is.
He forces us to confront all these, like, uncomfortable questions about the nature of progress, the limits of ambition, the potential for good intentions to go astray.
It's like we're looking into this mirror and seeing both our own aspirations and our own anxieties reflected back at us.
It's a powerful experience.
It is. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about storytelling in general.
I agree.
It allows us to explore these really complex issues in a safe space.
Right.
You know, like we can grapple with these difficult emotions and gain new perspectives on the challenges that we face in our own lives.
It's like a thought experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
We can engage with these hypothetical scenarios and learn from the character's choices without having to experience the consequences firsthand.
That's why Viktor's story, I think, resonates with so many people.
I think so, too.
It speaks to those, like, universal hopes and fears, you know, that struggle with ambition and the desire to make a difference in the world.
It's a very human story.
It is. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can make mistakes, that even the best intentions can lead to unintended consequences.
Right.
And that the pursuit of progress always comes at a cost.
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Right. There's always a trade-off.
Always.
And it challenges us to think critically
yes.
about the choices we make, both individually and collectively.
Absolutely.
And to recognize that the future isn't, like, predetermined. It's something that we create through our actions and decisions.
I love that. It's a very empowering message.
It is.
It's not about waiting for someone else to fix the world.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that each of us has a role to play.
Right. Like, we all have agency.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about Viktor as this potential savior, as a potential threat.
Right.
But I think there's another layer to his story that we haven't really fully explored yet.
Oh, okay. What's that?
And the podcast touches on this, the idea of, like, societal injustice.
Okay.
And how that might have influenced his choices.
That's an interesting angle.
Yeah. Can we dig into that a bit more?
Definitely. It's important to remember that Viktor's ambition isn't born in a vacuum.
Right.
You know, he grew up in poverty, facing discrimination and prejudice because of his physical limitations.
Really?
The system failed him.
It did.
And so, in a way, his desire to create this man-made heaven could be seen as a rebellion against a world that perpetuates suffering and inequality.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's like his goal wasn't just about, like, personal transcendence. It was about challenging a system that devalues certain people and creates barriers to their well-being.
Yeah, he wants to level the playing field.
Right. So it adds this whole new dimension to his motivations.
It does.
It suggests that his pursuit of a perfect world wasn't just about escaping human weakness.
Right.
It was about creating a society where those weaknesses are no longer used to justify oppression or to deny people, like, basic rights and opportunities.
He wants to create a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Right. So it's almost like a social justice movement.
Interesting.
But instead of, like, fighting for equality within the existing system, he's trying to create a new system altogether.
Right.
One that, like, transcends those limitations.
That's a radical approach.
It is. It raises these questions about the role of individual responsibility versus systemic change.
Oh, that's a good point.
You know, is Viktor's approach a viable solution?
Right.
Or is it a distraction from addressing the root causes?
Yeah, like, is he trying to bypass the hard work of social change?
Right. It's like that age-old debate. Do we focus on fixing individuals?
Right.
Or do we try to fix the systems that create those problems?
Yeah.
Viktor's story seems to suggest that both are important.
I think so, too.
It does. And it reminds us that real change often requires a multifaceted approach.
Right.
You know, we need to work towards creating a more just and equitable society while also empowering individuals to reach their full potential.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
Right. It's a complex issue, and there's no easy answer.
There isn't.
But Viktor's story gives us a lot to think about.
It does.
Especially when we consider the ways in which technology can be used to either reinforce existing inequalities or to create a more just and equitable world.
Right. It's a tool that can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's one more perspective that I want to explore before we move on.
Oh.
The podcast also mentions this idea of viewing Viktor through the lens of disability studies.
Interesting.
Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So disability studies is a field that challenges traditional notions of ability and normalcy.
Okay.
You know, it encourages us to question how we define and value human differences and to recognize the ways in which disability is often socially constructed.
Okay. So instead of seeing disability as like a problem to be fixed or cured, we should embrace it as a natural part of human diversity.
Exactly.
Okay.
Disability studies argues that there's no one right way to be human and that our differences should be celebrated, not stigmatized.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
How does this perspective apply to Viktor, though?
Right.
I mean, he clearly struggles with his physical limitations.
He does.
And his desire to transcend them seems to be a major driving force behind his actions.
That's true. But his story can also be seen as a critique of ableism.
What's ableism?
So ableism is the idea that there's a normal way to be human.
Okay.
And that anyone who deviates from that norm is somehow inferior or undesirable.
Oh.
And so I think by seeking to transcend his physical limitations through technology, Viktor is actually challenging those ableist ideas.
Okay, so he's not reinforcing them.
No, I don't think so.
He's challenging them.
Right. He's saying, like, my disability doesn't define me, and I'm going to use technology to create my own version of what it means to be human.
Right. He's reclaiming his agency.
Exactly.
Instead of conforming to societal expectations.
He's pushing back against the idea that he needs to be fixed.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that disability is not like a personal failing.
Right.
It's a social construct.
Exactly.
It's a really powerful message.
It is.
And it makes me wonder if Viktor's story can be seen as a metaphor for the broader struggle for disability rights and inclusion.
I think it definitely can.
Yeah.
His journey can be interpreted as a reflection of the ongoing fight for equality and justice for people with disabilities.
It's a reminder that we all have different abilities and limitations.
Right.
And that diversity should be celebrated, not erased.
Absolutely.
And it highlights the importance of creating a world that's accessible and inclusive for everyone, regardless of their physical or mental abilities.
I think that's a really important takeaway from Viktor's story.
Okay, so we've explored a lot of different interpretations of Viktor's character here.
We have.
From savior to tragic figure, the social revolutionary and disability advocate.
Yeah, it's amazing how one character can evoke so many different perspectives.
It really is.
And spark such rich conversations.
It's like he's this, like, Rorschach test for our own values and beliefs.
Right. We see in him what we want to see.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to recap what we've discussed so far.
Sounds good.
We've explored Viktor as this potential savior, offering a technological utopia, but also as this potential threat, challenging the natural order and risking these unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
It is. We've also talked about his motivations, recognizing the role that societal injustice and his own experiences with disability might have played in shaping his ambitions.
All connected.
And we've considered how his story can be interpreted through the lens of disability studies, challenging ableist norms and promoting a more inclusive understanding of what it means to be human.
I think that's really key.
It is.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And I'm eager to hear what other insights the podcast has to offer.
Me too. Let's dive back in.
Welcome back to the show. We are wrapping up our deep dive into Arcane's Viktor.
This has been a great discussion.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've been talking about Viktor like, is he a savior? Is he a tragic figure? Is he, kind of like a social revolutionary?
Right, or a disability advocate.
Disability advocate, right. All these different perspectives.
It's amazing how one character can spark so many different interpretations.
It is. It really is.
And the podcast we've been using really emphasizes that.
Yeah.
That, like, Viktor's story is open to interpretation.
Yeah.
There isn't, like, one definitive answer to the question of whether he's a hero or villain or something in between.
I like that.
Yeah.
It keeps the conversation going.
Right.
Because it's not about finding the right answer. It's about wrestling with these ideas and coming to our own conclusions. And one thing that stuck out to me from the podcast
is
this idea that even with the best of intentions, our ambition can sometimes blind us to the potential consequences of our actions.
Oh, for sure.
And that seems particularly relevant to Viktor's story.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because we've been talking about how Viktor's desire to create this man-made heaven could have these unintended and potentially disastrous consequences.
Right, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say.
It is. It is.
Right. And I think the podcast suggests that Viktor's story serves as this kind of cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Right. It's like those stories about people who make deals with the devil.
Oh, yeah.
Or who try to play God.
Right, and end up paying the price.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a classic theme.
It is. It's a theme that resonates across, all these different cultures.
It does.
And time periods.
Yeah.
And it definitely feels relevant to Viktor's journey.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
It speaks to that idea that we need to approach progress with a sense of humility.
Right.
Yeah. Recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that our actions can have these ripple effects that we might not anticipate.
That's a good point. So it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Exactly.
And being mindful of the choices we make along the way. And considering the cost.
Right.
Not just for ourselves, but for others as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message for all of us.
It is.
Regardless of what we do, Yeah. Whether we're working in science or technology or any other field.
So how do we apply that to Viktor's story then? How do we weigh his ambition against the potential harm that his actions might cause?
It's a tough question.
It is.
And I think that's where the moral ambiguity of his character really comes into play.
Because we see his brilliance.
Yeah.
We see his compassion, right? His desire to help people.
He wants to alleviate suffering, but he's willing to go to extremes to do it.
Yeah. And that's the tough part.
It is, and it's what makes him such a compelling character.
It is.
He's not this, clear-cut hero or villain.
Right, he's both.
He's both,
Yeah.
and he forces us to confront these really uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
About the nature of progress, the limits of ambition, the potential for good intentions to go astray.
It's like we're looking in the mirror. I keep coming back to that.
Yeah.
We see both our aspirations and our anxieties reflected back at us.
It's like he's a mirror to humanity.
Yeah, he is.
And I think that's one of the most powerful things about storytelling.
Our struggles with ambition and the desire to make a difference.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can make mistakes.
Right.
That even the best intentions can lead to unintended consequences.
And the pursuit of progress always has a cost.
Always.
Okay, as we wrap up our deep dive into Viktor and Arcane, what are some key takeaways that you hope listeners walk away with?
Well, I hope they come away with a deeper understanding of, how complex Viktor's character is and the many different ways his story can be interpreted.
Right.
There are no easy answers.
Right.
And that's okay.
It's not about finding the right answer.
Right.
It's about engaging with the questions, challenging our own assumptions, and kind of expanding our understanding of the world.
Exactly. And I also hope they come away with an appreciation for the power of storytelling.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Stories like Viktor's allow us to explore these ethical dilemmas and gain new perspectives.
Yeah, it's a safe space to wrestle with these big ideas.
Right.
And to learn from the characters' choices.
Exactly. And finally, I hope listeners come away with a sense of agency.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Because Viktor's story reminds us that the future is not predetermined. It's something that we create through our choices and actions.
We all have a role to play.
We do.
And that's such an empowering message, especially right now.
It is.
When we're facing all these, complex challenges in the world.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're not alone.
Right.
That we have the power to act and that together we can create a better future.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration.
It's been my pleasure.
Of Viktor's world.
Yeah.
And all the thought-provoking ideas that his story has sparked.
Remember, everyone, keep exploring and keep questioning.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.